controlling, we would have had a convention a long, long time ago. It is controlling. It is binding. And I litigated the case. Congress tried to change the rules for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment in the middle of the process. I litigated the case myself, and the court held it is unconstitutional to change the rules in the middle of the process. So we have established precedent on the point. It was a district court precedent. It wasn't a Supreme Court precedent. The case was ruled to be moved by the Supreme Court because we helped kill the last 3 states, so they never got 38 states to ratify them. It's still considered a persuasive precedent, even though it's not officially binding because it wasn't issued by the Supreme Court. But nonetheless, the precedent is on our side. There's no precedent to the contrary. And so we know, as confidently as I was asked by the Missouri State Judiciary Committee how confident I was in these rules. I said, as confident as you are for any law you ever pass. Now, because we're dealing with human beings, you can't know that somebody's not going to abuse it. But when the legislature passes a law that says the maximum speed limit in the state is 75, usually gets followed. 75 is the rule. They're not going to do 85. They're going to do 75, because that's what the statute is. And so as confident as we can ever be in any law, any time, including nullification laws that are being bandied about. We're as confident of this, I have 100% confidence, given the general aspect, law is law, and human beings are human beings, and I can only tell you what is utterly probable. If somebody takes a gun and seizes power, well, different things happen. And if that happens, we just take our guns and we unseize them. But absent just aberrational, crazy stuff, I guarantee you this is what's going to happen. So, step 2, at the convention, one state, one vote. How do I know that? Well, the same reason I know that the Second Amendment protects individual liberties and not just militia rights. If you read the Second Amendment alone, you could be confused about that. Because it does talk about militia, and it does talk about individual liberties. But if you read the historical documents that go along with it, as the Supreme Court did in the 2 recent cases, one of the 2 cases where they got the thing right, finally, the McDonald case and the DC versus Heller case, they read the history of the Second Amendment, and they got it right. You read the history of Article 5, we've had 32 conventions, multi-state conventions in the history of America, most before the Constitutional Convention, but several after the Constitutional Convention. Every single time it's one state, one vote. There was a proposal in one of those conventions to go to proportional representation. They took a vote on that motion. They voted one state, one vote on that motion, and a majority of the states weren't stupid, and they voted no. And so it will be one state, one vote, I guarantee you, because it's not in the interest of the states. In fact, some of the big states, Florida's a big state. Texas is a big state. There is no way conservative Florida and conservative Texas, by comparison to Massachusetts and Illinois and California, they're not going to side with Massachusetts and California and Illinois on such matters. They're going to side with Oklahoma and Idaho and Alabama and Georgia and so on. Where it will be one state, one vote in that convention. Then you have to have it ratified by 38 states. How are we going to get 38 states to do this? In 40 states, we're aiming at 40 states. There are 10 states that we just view as bonus land. If something good happens in California or Massachusetts or Hawaii or most of New England or Illinois, New York, that's just gravy, that's bonus. We're not counting on any of those states. In the convention, I'm not worried about them. Let them send whatever idiots they want. They can rant and rave all they want. They get one vote per state. Let the heathen nations rile in vain. Big deal. We're not holding a talk show. We're holding a convention where there's voting rights. And it's one state, one vote. You write the actual amendments there. You send them to the states. 40 states are in play. There are 4,000 state legislative districts in those 40 states. House districts. If you organize the House districts, you organize the Senate districts by definition. In those 40 states, 4,000 districts. Our goal is to, at a minimum, have 75% of those districts have a political organization that's operational in those 75% of those districts. By operational, we mean we have a district captain, and we have, on average, 100 people per district. Now, Rhode Island has such small legislative districts, 100 would be a really big number in Rhode Island. So it might be like 60 or 30 in Rhode Island. And in California, if we were playing in California, which we're not focused on, if it's in California, we'd want like 2,000 per district, because their numbers are just, they have very small legislative numbers for the size of the state. But on average, just 100 people. And if we have 100 people in 3,000 districts, I guarantee you, well, I can tell you, I have an absolute guarantee in a second, so I'll save the word. It is utterly probable that we win all the stuff I've been talking about with 100 per legislative district. I had a Speaker of the House of Virginia told me he was getting complaints from one of his legislators because he's getting so many calls on this issue. He said, well, how many calls do you get? I said, 6. That's a lot of calls. 6. 100 calls is incredibly rare. 100 calls is 300,000 people nationwide. That's all I need. 300,000 people nationwide. And the plan I just laid out for you is probable. You give me 1,000 people on average in the legislative districts, 3 million people nationwide, less than 1% of the American public, I absolutely guarantee you we can deliver this. It is, you get 1,000 state people to call a state legislature, and you call them and ask them to climb an apple tree and sing I Want to Hold Your Hand in French, they'll do it. Most of the time. But certainly, if you call 75% with that number, and you only need 50% plus 1, I guarantee you, we get all that I've just described if 1% of the American population will show up, speak up, stand up. We do that, we win. There's no stopping us. And frankly, folks, the ultimate protection against any abuse by government of any kind, whether it's runaway convention or runaway government or Common Core or any issue you want to name, the number one thing is an effective, organized citizenry. Citizens won't organize around ideas. They organize around action plans. You know, the Tea Party was a great thing. We had an idea, and I spoke at Tea Party meetings in the early stages of it. I was never a leader of anything because I was doing other stuff. But I supported, and I showed up and spoke at Tea Party meetings. Tea Party had the idea if we elect conservative members to Congress, we change things. Well, you know what? We elected a whole bunch of conservative members to Congress in 2010. We changed the political dynamics in Washington, D.C. What happened? Washington, D.C. changed the people we sent. Have we slowed down the national debt? No. Have we reversed Obamacare? No. We used a weapon. It's a good weapon. It's an important weapon. If you got a 22 and it's in your arsenal, you need to keep the 22 clean, and you need to use it when you have a chance to use your 22. Use your 22. But we need something a little bigger than a 22. We need a howitzer or something, you know, I want a 50 caliber machine gun or something that's a whole lot bigger than a 22. And I want to take dead aim at Washington, D.C. itself. I want to impeach Washington, D.C. entirely. And there's only one way to do it, and that's the methodology I just laid out for you. And if you want to help, I urge you to sign up. If you think you've got another plan that will work better, go work your other plan. God bless you. I hope you're successful. I would just ask one thing. Don't throw rocks at my plan. Because if you don't, the only people you're helping by throwing rocks at me is Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, and Boehner, and J. Vernon McGee, one of my favorite radio preachers of all time, said there are believers, there are non-believers, and there are make-believers. And in Washington, D.C., you got a lot of non-believers. You got a handful of believers, people who really believe in liberty. There are a few. and they're really, really encouraging to hang around. You know, people like Mark Meadows from North Carolina, Mike Lee, Ted Cruz. There are a few really, 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 really good people. But mostly, you got a whole bunch of make believers. And the make believers and the non-believers work together to preserve the power of Washington, D.C. And I want to send as many believers as we possibly can there. I want to keep that 22 well-oiled. I want to keep sending people there. But I want to take away their power entirely, permanently, because if we don't, this country is going to crash. The debt is just the starting point. It is going to crash. So, with that, I want to take your questions. So, we've got some questions here.
I have a list of questions. I'm going to start out with Paul Henry, Adam Chandler, and Randy McDaniel for the first three.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm going to get this turned around to where you can hear me because I'm kind of soft-spoken.
Okay.
I've got nice things to say about you, sir. You're a good man. This is a good cause that you're trying to do. I'm not going to call you an idiot or anything like that. I'm not going to throw your rocks at you. Just floor clear. I'm Paul Henry. I'm a lobbyist here in Florida. I deal with politicians and I've done so for 3 years. Proponents of the convention say that one great security against bad amendments is the required ratification of any new amendments by 3/4 of the states. The 16th income tax, 17th direct election of senators, and 18th prohibition amendments were all passed with the same safeguards in place. Question: if enough states didn't stand against these bad amendments, how can we depend on enough states opposing future bad amendments?
Okay. Can I answer that before we go to the next question? Okay. All right. The answer is all of those amendments were perceived to be good amendments in their day. And people were made promises, and they, history has proven those to be bad amendments. What we know in common from all those is they were proposed by Congress. Every single one of them were proposed by Congress. This is going to be coming from a different source. So we have two levels of control. We're not letting Congress speak into the process at all. The states originate the process. Frankly, I wrote the application. So I'm the original control valve on the process. What amendments are germane? And the amendments that are germane are limit or impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. I can't think of a bad amendment that would fulfill that. I can think of things that are not as good as I'd hoped for, but you can't have a bad one that imposes fiscal restraints on the federal government. The second is limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Any amendment on that is either going to be pretty good, or fantastic. The third thing is impose term limits on the officials. Maybe the term limits wouldn't be as short as I would want them, but I'd rather have 12 years term limit on Congress than not have any term limits at all. I'd rather have 20 years on the Supreme Court than no term limits at all. I'd prefer to have 8 years on the Supreme Court or 6 years on the Supreme Court, but I'm happy to but when you control the agenda in the get-go, you control what the outcome is. And we meaning people that are promoting the Convention of the States and the state legislatures that formally adopt it, we control the agenda. When you control the agenda up front, you have a choice of yes or no on good amendments. Those are the only things that are on the table.
Thank you for the answer. Next question: if, for example, as noted in Florida bills H 381 and Senate 476, the 10th Amendment is not currently being obeyed by both Democrats and Republicans, then how is a new amendment to limit federal power will somehow result in compliance?
Okay? Because I've taken away their power to make decisions. I'm not leaving it in the discretion of Congress or the Supreme Court. You change the method of power, the method of decision making. When the Supreme Court enforces the 18-year-old vote amendment just fine. They invoke the 2-year or the 2-term limit on the president works just fine. The 16th Amendment, unfortunately, works just fine. By the way, I held in my hand all the original ratification documents of every amendment, including the 16th Amendment, from 13th Amendment forward to modern history. None of them were properly ratified. And we need to fix that process as well, to make sure the amendments are correctly ratified. And we can do that. But we don't let the same people be making the decisions of whether they're going to obey or not. We're going to take away their power to make the decisions. And the courts, once reconstructed, will, on the short run, they'll make the right decisions. On the long run, there might be a problem. That's why I want to fix the Supreme Court. But look, if we only got 50 years of obedience to the new amendments, well, that's 50 years of good, rather than 50 years of horrible killing the country. And if we validated the process, if things start to go a little bit awry 45 years from now, then my grandchildren can pick up the thing and fix it again. Because it's going to always be eternal vigilance, because you can never trust government ever, ever, ever. If we think we're going to have a magic system in place that's going to work perfectly forever, we're crazy. And so we've got to have robust power in the hands of the right places so we can stop the abuse of power permanently. The best thing we can do forever is to make sure that everybody in Washington, D.C. knows you abuse your power again, the states and the people will rise up again, and they'll take it from you again. And if we have to keep fighting that battle 2, 3, 4, 5 times, fine. We fight the battle 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I'm not ready to give up ever again. You know, if I was willing to give up homeschooling rights because we failed in 3 states, like we failed with the 16th, 17th, and 18th Amendments, homeschooling wouldn't be legal in this country. I went back and back and back and back and back. Supreme Court of North Dakota turned me down so many times when I'd argue in front of the Supreme Court of North Dakota, rather than say, may it please the court. I'd say, Fred, Bill, Steve, how's it going, guys? Good to see you again. Back for yet another round. Persistent widow parable is my favorite parable in Scripture on this point. And what Jesus said at the end of it, when I return again, will I find faith on the earth? Our duty is persistence in the face of injustice. And I'm not going to give up in fear because at some point in the past, we didn't get exactly what we wanted out of the same process. We got Ronald Reagan out of the electoral process. We got Barack Obama out of the electoral process. I'm not willing to give up the electoral process because we got Barack Obama once. I want to still elect the president. I don't want some divine authority in New York City with a blue flag appointing the president of the United States. Thank you very much. I want to have the people voting for the president, not going to give up. Who's next?
All right. You mentioned Phyllis Schlafly in the Berger letter, and what I came out of that was once the convention is called, delegates are there, I know that they are responsible to their state legislatures, but is it possible that the delegates could end up changing or expanding the original scope as presented in the written application?
The answer is an individual delegate could try. He cannot be successful in that. There are several checks and balances on that. First of all, the state legislatures appoint the delegates. 27 state legislatures are controlled, both houses, by Republicans. I'm counting Nebraska, even though they're officially nonpartisan, it's really a Republican state. There are 6 states where the Republicans control one house, the Democrats control another. And if we can't appoint enough people to control those things, I think a state should send like 9. So if you have one crazy guy who wants to go do something, he's got to get a majority of your state, first of all, to come with him. If the Republicans can't appoint people to do that, the country's dead. You might as well give up and just go live in a bomb shelter and just give up. I'm not willing to do that. I'm willing to take, I trust Republican state legislators more than I trust Republican congressmen. I don't trust them as much as I trust myself, but you have to choose who you're going to trust. Well, I trust them to appoint people, and they have, and a majority of the states would have to approve something. 26 states have to approve something. So if every Democrat state, which is 17 Democrat states vote together in lockstep, you got 17 votes. They got to go get 9 Republican-controlled states or split states to join them. They cannot do it without votes from Republican-controlled states. Then we can sue them, and then whatever comes out on the other side has to be ratified by 38 states. And it's not going to be ratified. It's the easiest thing in the world to do is to kill someone. The hardest thing in the world is to pass it. And if we can't kill bad things with all those checks and balances in place, compare that to what checks and balances we have in place in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says there's no effective check and balance in our power. There's no limitations on the spending power. There's no limitations on it. We've got lots of checks. Will all of them fail? I don't think so. There are no checks on the other side. None, zero, they don't exist. We've got checks. I'm willing to trust the checks more than I'm willing to trust the Supreme Court. We can keep going.
All right. And that leads me to my follow-up, which is that I understand in the Article 5, the whole thing is keep Congress out of it,
Right.
keep it within the states.
Right.
I've kind of forgotten the ratification. What role can the Supreme Court, can they stop it at any level?
The Supreme Court could hear a proper challenge to the process, just like they did in the ERA case. We were before the Supreme Court, they granted jurisdiction, they sat on it until the second deadline applied, and then, passed, and then they ruled it moot. So if, one of the checks that could happen is if the convention disobeys their orders and does something else, I would sue them. It would end up in the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court could hear something like that. But the Supreme Court can't unilaterally do anything. They've got to have somebody with standing file a case. And so the court, this is an area where all the law on Article 5 that exists follows history pretty well. It's one of the rare areas, like the Second Amendment. They are following history really pretty well on the Second Amendment. There's every reason to believe that they would do that. But the window of opportunity they have is really narrow. And it would be only an abuse of the process. And the only abuse of the process is going to come from the other side, not from us. They can't stop the good things from happening. We potentially have the ability to stop bad things from happening. It's one of the arms, but our ultimate check on bad things from happening is not the Supreme Court. Our ultimate check is 38 states have to ratify. So with that weapon, I know I can kill anything.
We need Jewel Higgins, Pat Watkins, and Ed Foster up.
Can somebody go to that nice cooler over there? There's a Diet Coke in there.
There's a water.
Yeah, water. I need energy as well. There's a Diet Coke in there, right behind you. If God didn't want us to drink chemicals, He wouldn't have made the jersey. That's what I'll say.
Thanks for everything, Daniel. So my question, first of all, before I start, there is a check and balance